We're going to begin chapter 4, and we are on paragraph 16. The naive man regards his percepts, such as they appear to his immediate apprehension, as things having an existence wholly independent of him. When he sees a tree, he believes in the first instance that it stands in the form which he sees, with the colors of its various parts, and so on, there on the spot towards which his gaze is directed. When the same man sees the sun in the morning appear as a disk on the horizon and follows the course of this disk, he believes that all this has actually exists and happens just as he observes it. To this belief he clings until he meets with further percepts which contradict his former ones. The child who as yet has no experience of distance grasps at the moon and only corrects its picture of the reality based on first impressions, when a second percept contradicts the first. Every extension of the circle of my percepts compel me to correct my picture of the world. We see this in everyday life as well, in the spiritual development of mankind. The picture which the ancients made for themselves of the relation of the earth to the sun and other heavenly bodies had to be replaced by another, when Copernicus found that it was not in accordance with some percepts which in those early days were unknown. A man who has been born blind said, when operated on by Dr. Franz, that the picture of the size of objects which he had formed by his sense of touch before his operation was a very different one. He had to correct his tactual percepts by his visual percepts. And the summary for paragraph 16 is, every extension in the sphere of my percepts makes me correct my image of the world. This applies to everyday life as well as to the spiritual evolution of mankind. Okay, so that's just basically saying that we're always encountering new objects of observations or percepts, and as we continue every day in life, we're going to have these new percepts that help refine our concepts and whatnot. So I mean as an example is, as you can see, when you're 20 and you have an experience of the world, and you have, based on all your life experiences up to that point, you have certain ideas and observations or whatnot that you've formulated. But as you continue to grow older and have new experiences, your perception of things will change because you're experiencing new percepts and you're having these new observations and whatnot. So you're continuously changing your picture of the world when you have these new percepts. That is, if you're actually out there and putting yourself out there where you're exposed to different percepts or whatnot. So that's paragraph 16. Paragraph 17 is really short. It's, how is it that we are compelled to make these continual corrections to our observations? Our group just summarized that as, why are we compelled to continually correct our observations? I just wanted to point out, I have the English translation, and in the American one, the other book, instead of how, they have why. So I think that's something that is very interesting to point out, because how and why are obviously very different, because how is referring to a process, whereas why is just like why, it's a different word. So it's interesting that there's those two different words being used in this little paragraph. So he basically wants us to figure out, how are we making these corrections to our observations? Why is there this continual need to want to keep updating our observations and whatnot? I'm going to move on to 18. A simple reflection gives the answer to this question. When I stand at one end of an avenue, the trees at the other end, away from me, seem smaller and nearer together than those where I stand. My percept picture changes when I change the place from which I am looking. Therefore, the form in which it presents itself to me is dependent on a condition which is due not to the object, but to me, the perceiver. It is all the same to the avenue wherever I stand, but the picture I have of it depends essentially on just this viewpoint. In the same way, it makes no difference to the sun and the planetary system that human beings happen to look at them from the earth. But the percept picture of the heavens presented to them is determined by the fact that they inhabit the earth. This dependence of our percept picture on our place of observation is the easiest one to understand. The matter becomes more difficult when we realize how our world of percepts is dependent on our bodily and spiritual organization. The physicist shows us that within the space in which we hear a sound, there are vibrations of the air, and also that the body in which we seek the origin of the sound exhibits a vibrating movement of its parts. We perceive this movement as sound only if we have a normally constructed ear. Without this, the world would be forever silent for us. Physiology tells us that there are people who perceive nothing of the magnificence, splendor of color which surrounds us. Their percept picture has only degrees of light and dark. Others are blind only to one color, for example, red. Their world picture lacks this hue, and hence it is actually a different one from that of the average man. I should like to call the dependence of my percept picture on my place of observation mathematical, and its dependent on my organization qualitative. The former determines the proportions of size and mutual distances of my percepts, the latter their quality. The fact that I see a red surface as red, this qualitative determination, depends on the organization of my eye. And the summary for 18 is, my perceptual picture is dependent upon, number 1, my geographical relationship to my percept, which can be referred to as mathematical, and number 2, my bodily and spiritual organization, which is qualitative. I think qualitative is pretty easy to understand because what he says here, when it comes to qualitative, it's dependent on our bodily and spiritual organization. So obviously if I have some sort of flaw, such as I'm blind, it's going to obviously affect how I perceive the world. And that's how we formulate our percepts. And also what influences us is where we stand on where your place of observation is. And that he refers to as mathematical. So, obviously, we perceive the Earth from our vantage point, but if we were, say, on another planet, our place of observation would be different, and that he refers to as mathematical, and our concepts that we formulate would be different because we would be at a different place of observation. And again, if we also have our ability to observe is also based on our physical body and mental body and whatnot, that affects how, as I mentioned, say we're blind. I mean, obviously, if I'm blind, I'm going to not get various information, and that also affects my objects of observation that I gather in my life. So those two things are very important to understand on why we are compelled to make continual corrections. And I will stop it right there, and hopefully this paragraph, it was very large, but I think it's pretty simple if you just reflect on it. So I'll see you all later and have a good day.